Tools and Means. Written and read by John Miro. Episode 10. The world was blackness. Tom. He held on to that name. His name was Tom. Everything else, every person, every memory, every agony melted away. Please, fight. Was that a thought? Was Tom imagining the woman's voice? The girl's voice, really. No, he knew that voice. From some time long ago. From someone long ago. Wisps of smoke and light gathered in the darkness and became Allie, the sister who loved him. She knelt beside him now and smiled. Not her gentle smile, something feral. Her eyes held to him with a loving, fierce gaze. Fight, little brother. Tom's body shook as something tried to make him look away from her. And something else in the dark laughed. An ugly sound. A tall man in a hat stepped out of the darkness and put his hands on Allie's shoulders, stroked them softly. The man looked down at her and licked his lips. Allie froze. Her eyes grew wide and pleaded with Tom to do something. Bob. It was Bob. Tom remembered the name, and the history smashed home. Tom felt dirty under his skin, in his cells. He heard all the time. Allie was gone because of Bob. His family was gone because of Bob. He screamed again, arched his body, and swung his bloody fist into the chuckling man. His fist didn't flail through. His hatred wasn't mocked by that gut-churning chuckle. No, this time his fist landed with a satisfying, meaty impact. Bob's head snapped to the side. Then the phantom that had tormented him from deep inside his mind, from a place monster Bob had gutted out all to himself all those years ago, Bob fell on his ass. His hand splayed behind him. Bob's face grew bright with light from passing cars, and Tom saw the shock he wore. Tom stared at him, panting hard. His body was his again, and it was his own ragged pain and anger he felt. He stared at the ugly scar with the shape of a man always beyond his ability to touch, before today. Maybe he was sick, or diseased, like the other voice in his head, the one that had taken Bob over, had said. But he wasn't all the way nuts. He knew he'd hurt this thing, hurt Bob, and whatever puppet master was now guiding Bob. Tom got to his knees and started to laugh. The phantom stared, shock playing out on its face. The blue flame flickered in its eyes. Tom reached a hand out towards the thing, and blue-eyed Bob flinched away. Tom laughed harder and got to his feet. He wiped away flecks of saliva from his mouth and sneered at the transformed ghost. Think we're done here. The thing that wasn't Bob snarled. Sit down. It scrabbled forward, fast and insect-like, like only a nightmare could, and reached out a hand for Tom's neck, and passed right through. Tom laughed again, and walked shakily down the street. Bob followed in his wake, raging, screaming. Tom spared him a look as he ran a hand through his hair and fixed his clothing as best he could. He'd lost a shirt button sometime in the struggle. Here! The thing wailed, screaming over Tom's shoulder into the thin stream of tourists on the sidewalk. Hurry! It's escaping! A fresh chill went through Tom, and he looked around. The few bodies near him didn't hear Bob's shrieks. Were the others like what had lived in George and now in Bob, in him, he knew. Were they close enough to hear? Tom scanned the thin crowd and saw the man from the bridge, the man in the trilby hat and loud shirt. This time, Tom could see blue fire burning in his eyes as well. Tom stepped close to a group of tipsy men in business suits, keeping them in between him and the man in the hat as he crossed the street. The man in the hat rushed on past, down the sidewalk towards the hotel. As its ally passed on by, the thing wearing Bob's memories erupted in sound, but not human sound. 1,000 furious, shrieking monsters of old poured into one voice, and nothing happened. The man in the trilby hat was gone, and the thing masquerading as Bob faded to a shadow, then to nothing at all. Tom was across the street and almost at the corner. He'd made it away. Clean. Or so he thought. He heard soft padding footfalls behind him, but didn't register them until someone was close enough to touch his shoulder. He spun and stared at Dr. Romer. She stood there, her makeup a mess, shaking, sniffling, bleeding. He looked around, but saw no one in uniform. She seemed to be alone. He met her face. What could he do now? She was a victim. He couldn't hurt her, but she knew his face. She could scream. The others on the street would hear her. She could lead the creatures to him, or worse, the badges. The badges wouldn't understand that everything he'd done was to bring the scales back into balance. He stared, dumb, silent, and waited. "You weren't here," she said. "When they ask, I never saw you." He was still frozen. No thoughts in his head, nothing but exhaustion and confusion and fear. She broke the impasse, reached forward, and clawed her arms around his neck for an awkward, desperate hug. "Thank you." Then, as abruptly as it started, the embrace ended, and she stepped back. Her face came together then, a professional demeanor settling into place. She opened the small purse she still held in her hand. He tensed, eyes darting around again, but no net was closing. Only a couple others even in earshot on the street now. He looked back, in time to focus on the small white card in her trembling hand. "You need help," she said. He took the card and read it. Claire Romer, psychiatrist. He looked up, fearful again. She fought for composure, but an animal still paced in her eyes. "Anything," she began, but her voice broke. She looked down, swallowed hard, and met his eyes again. "Anything you need. Anything you need. I'll help." She opened her mouth to say more, and her mask almost cracked. She rolled her eyes, looked away, mastering the fear, the echoes of what had just happened to her, and met Tom's eyes again. "Thank you," she said again. He saw the pain in her, the gratitude, the understanding they had both just experienced something terrible, something new to them both. He nodded once and stayed silent. She seemed to expect that, turned, and walked away. He stood there with her card in his hand a moment longer, watching the woman go. Her movements were wooden, but she kept her chin up, and there was strength in her. So much strength. He watched her a little while longer, impressed. Then he pocketed the card and rounded the corner, quickly, before she decided to look back. Claire dabbed a rare, clean spot of the towel over her bloody forehead and hissed. "I'm fine, Amy," she said through gritted teeth. And she was fine. Inside where it counted, at least, she was fine. Her head felt like someone had stuck it inside a bell tower, then played the bell like a steel drum with twin sledgehammers, and her project was dead. She'd never get the funding to extend the project in time now, and she'd have to start over from square one if anywhere else would have her. But she was fine. She'd nearly lost her life. She'd been through something horrible. But she was still here. She thought about that single-minded drive she possessed that had gotten her this far so soon. All her life she'd pursued psychology, rehabilitation, changing the world, all like a woman possessed, only taking time out alternate Tuesdays for softball league, and never joining her team at the bar afterwards, even then. She wasn't an old woman, despite Amy's good-natured ribbing. She just acted like one. Claire thought about that. About acting like an old woman, and knew it was true, and laughed. Amy ran forward and put an arm over her shoulder. "It's okay, honey." "I know," Claire laughed louder and hugged her friend. Her one true friend in the world. "Oh, Ames, how do you put up with me?" Amy gently pressed her fingers to Claire's temples and watched her pupils. "How long did you say you were out for?" Claire put her hands over Amy's and pulled them down, holding them tightly. "I'm all right." Amy's face telegraphed her disbelief, but Claire talked faster before she could voice it. "Really, I am." She forced herself not to look away and continued. It was horrible. All of it. She thought about the man again. She'd told Amy everything she remembered, everything but about the blue light at least, and swore her to secrecy before and after the fact. "Ames, what happened tonight?" "It was a nightmare. But it woke me up to some things." Claire took a deep breath. "When the police come, we just say the senator had a headache, and I went home. We don't know anything that happened after that." Amy's lips pressed together. Claire held her hands and shook them. "Promise me again." Amy opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. "You promise. We'll talk about this once a week until I say stop." You promise that we'll talk about this once a week until I say we can stop." Claire released Amy's hands and hugged her again. "I just lost you your job, and you want to be my therapist? You're one of a kind. Okay, yes." Amy relaxed and returned the embrace. "I'm not kidding. A man died, Doc." Claire pulled away, her face serious. "I think I want to talk. About a lot of things." She made herself continue to rip at the scab again before it could be made whole. "I thought I was going to die. I was sure. I was going to die." She stepped out of the embrace and gestured to the fresh towels beside Amy. "And all I could think of was if I die, I get to see my dad again. And all I can tell him is how hard I tried to make the world a better place. So other girls wouldn't lose their dad." "Thanks," she said, taking a towel from Amy and turning back to the sink. "It was my death flashing before my eyes, not my life," she said, spinning the tap and putting the towel under the faucet. "And you know what? Dad didn't care about how much good I did for others. He just looked sad that my life was only about that." She leaned a hip against the sink and put the cool cloth over the gash on her forehead. Another thing, I need to get laid more." Amy burst out laughing and took Claire down with her. Amy leaned against the sink beside her and squeezed Claire's knee in a death grip as the fit took them both. Claire got her breath back first. No, I do. I need to change some things and do some living. And I need to get out into the world, not just take notes about it from a chair in the corner." She patted Amy's shoulder. "And if you still want to work for crap money, I just decided I'm opening a general practice, and I could use a partner." Amy stood straight. "What the hell? I know a guy died and all, but you can't just give up on your life's—" "I did," Claire cut her off. "I gave up on any kind of life. Long ago." She shrugged, accepting it, as she said the words. "I'll keep up the research. Find a nice college town where I can do both, maybe, so long as there's a lockup around. What about it, Ames? Partners?" Amy stared at her. "Either you got hit harder than I thought, or—" "Here, give me that." she said, and took the towel from Claire's hands. Claire let her examine the wound. Stitches would be better, but a couple of pieces of tape will hold it. She leaned back and met Claire's eyes. The hair will cover most, but you're going to have a character scar. Claire snorted. Won't be my first. Amy put down the cloth and reached into the second sink for a wine cooler. Take this. Medicinal purposes. Claire accepted the bottle. Amy took one too, and both women were silent for a bit. So your dad was pissed? Claire frowned. I think she started, then stopped. Look, if I have a kid, she started again, and they watch me die in the street, and then 20 years later I get to check in on them again, I hope I'm going to see them busy with friends, kids, grandkids maybe. Hell, I hope they at least have some hobbies. Amy stayed silent, watching Claire, and Claire knew her face showed the heavy processing her brain was going through. So, in this analogy, Amy asked, you're what, Batman? The two women stared at each other for a beat, before the laughter. Oh, Aim, stop, Claire gasped, holding her head and wincing. Even through the pain, it was hard to get the laughter under control. She risked another swig of the wine cooler and then set it down beside the sink. The Bruce Wayne part, maybe. The obsessed part. Yeah. Everything I've done, everything, is still a reaction to losing him. Amy picked Claire's drink back up and wrapped Claire's fingers around it. Medicinal, remember? And yeah, that's pretty tragic, she said. Claire looked up and saw Amy hadn't decided everything yet. So the fat guy got what's coming to him, she asked. And this guy who saved you? We never saw him. We never saw any of it? None of it. Okay then, Amy said, and clinked her bottle to Claire's. Claire cocked her eyebrows, but her question was answered when Amy smiled and announced a single word. Partners. Claire grinned and stood to hug Amy. The grin faded as soon as Claire stepped back, her face heavy again. If they were partners, Amy needed to know. More to the point, Claire needed to say it. Amy, there was a blue light. You have been listening to Tools and Means. Title music, Infiltrate This, by Atlas Plug, used with permission. For show notes, more information, and other fiction by me, John Muro, please visit servingworlds.com. Thank you for listening.